Hey everyone, it's Alex Eala. We're back here at the Rafa Nadal Academy prepping for Rome.
There's a moment in sports that never makes the highlight reel. It doesn't trend on Twitter, doesn't get clipped by the giant sports pages, doesn't end up with dramatic music and a million reposts by midnight. Most of the time, the mainstream press gives it two polite sentences, files it away somewhere between the rankings update and the injury report, and moves on like nothing happened. But the people who were actually there, the ones who felt the air change, who heard the crowd shift, who watched it with their own eyes, they don't forget it that easily. They carry it differently. They talk about it in quieter tones, with the kind of look that says you had to be there. May 7th, 2025, Court 6 at the Foro Italico in Rome. Alex Eala stands on one side of the net. Across from her is Marta Kostyuk. The scoreboard, brutal. 6-love. One set gone, not a single game on the board. In tennis language, that's what they call a bagel. In normal language, that's the kind of scoreline that usually sends people toward the exits before the coffee gets cold. By every traditional measure, this match should already be slipping into routine territory. Programs should be folding shut. Fans should be checking their phones, looking for the next court, the next star, the next match worth their time. You can almost picture it. Quiet footsteps, half-finished drinks, one eye on the exits, trying to beat the line for espresso. But then, something weird happens. The noise gets louder. Not polite applause, not sympathy claps. Louder, sharper, more alive. Philippine flags start rising above the stands like someone flipped a switch. Fans who had every reasonable excuse to leave, they're not leaving. They're staying. They're singing. They're turning what should have been a quiet funeral into something that suddenly feels a lot more like belief. And if you watch the footage carefully, really carefully, you'll see it. Alex Eala looks up, just for a second. A glance, a pause, a connection. That moment, between a player who just got bageled and a crowd that flat out refused to let the scoreboard write the entire story, that's where this story actually starts. Not with a trophy, not with a ranking milestone, not with a headline screaming future star. It starts with a crowd that looked at a scoreboard and basically said, "Nice try, but that's not the full story." Now, fast forward to May 2026. Alex Eala is ranked 44th in the world. She's got Tony Nadal. Yes, that Tony Nadal.
Typical day for me would look like training at 8 until 10:45, and then 11 to 12:30 I would be in the gym. I'd have lunch, I'd go to class, I'd have class until 5:45, and then at 6 I'd be on court again until 7, and then dinner. Every time I come back to the academy, I experience it in a different light, just because every time I come back, I've grown a little bit more, I've experienced a little bit more, but I think my team and the relationship I have with my coaches is really good. If I could say something to my younger self, I would tell her to go out of your comfort zone a little bit more and try to be a little bit more extroverted when you can.
The man who helped build one of clay court tennis's greatest empires with his nephew, Rafael Nadal, sitting in her coaching box. 10 Italian Open titles. 10? Some coaches collect notebooks. Tony apparently collects clay court masterpieces. And then Alex makes a decision that tells you exactly where her head is right now. She was the third seed at the WTA 125 Catalonia Open in Spain. Comfortable draw, familiar conditions. A tournament where on paper she had a real shot to make a serious run, maybe even lift the trophy. Safe points, safe momentum, safe tennis math. She withdrew, not because of injury, not because of fatigue, not because of scheduling chaos or travel drama, or the usual abundance of caution statement players love to post in neutral fonts. She withdrew because Rome called louder. She wanted to be back on the Foro Italico courts, a full week before the draw had even been announced. Let that sink in for a second. This is a player who lost 6-love, 6-1 on this exact clay, on this exact stage, in front of thousands of people. And her answer wasn't to avoid the memory. It wasn't to erase it. It wasn't to hide from it. Her answer was to show up earlier. That's not somebody running from failure. That's somebody looking failure straight in the face and saying, "We're not done here." And to really understand why that matters, you have to go back to 2025. Because Marta Kostyuk didn't just beat her in that first round, she walked through her. The first set, under 30 minutes. The second, barely more competitive. 1 game total. 1. And this happened on a court where Rafael Nadal built a legacy so dominant people practically speak about it like holy ground. Clay dust, history, trophies, pressure. The whole thing feels less like a tennis venue and more like a cathedral with baseline markings. 1 game, that's the scoreboard. But what happened after? That's the real story. Alex Eala walked to the net. She acknowledged her opponent, then she looked up at the crowd and acknowledged them too, properly, sincerely, without drama, without excuses, without pretending the loss didn't sting. And then she stayed. That same week, she came back out in doubles with Coco Gauff as her partner and battled all the way to the quarterfinals. Think about that. After a personal demolition, after a match that could have wrecked her confidence, she didn't disappear into the locker room and vanish from the tournament. She stayed in the building and competed again. People talk about mental strength all the time. They throw it around in interviews, social posts, documentaries, sponsorship campaigns. But this is what it looks like when it's real. It's not a speech. It's not a caption. It's not a motivational quote in black and white. It's showing up the next day when nobody would blame you for leaving. Then April 22-26 arrives, Linz, Austria. Alex Eala earns her first clay win of the season, 6-4, 6-3, over Julia Graber, ranked 89th in the world. Clean performance, controlled patterns, smart shot selection. No panic, no scrambling, no just survive and hope tennis. This looked like a player with a plan, and more importantly, a player who actually trusted it. But the detail that stayed with me wasn't the forehand. It wasn't the scoreline. It wasn't even the win. It was what happened after. She walked up for the on-court interview, started answering in the usual way, and then, mid-sentence, she switched into Tagalog. She looked into the crowd, found the Filipino fans, and spoke directly to them in a language that belonged to them, and only them. That wasn't just an interview. That was identity. That was connection. That was belonging. In Austria, at a mid-level clay event that probably wasn't exactly packed with Filipino fans waving banners the size of bed sheets, Alex Eala still found them anyway. Maybe a few dozen at most, maybe less. Doesn't matter. She spotted them like a seasoned hawk scanning a baseline rally, and then she said it. Ina nandito. Thank you to all the Filipinos who are here. That's not media training, that's not brand management. That's not someone thinking, okay, smile for the cameras. This plays well online. No, that's instinct. That's muscle memory. That's someone who carries home with her. Even when home is thousands of miles away. Even when the crowd is small enough to fit inside a family group chat. Because with Alex, the connection isn't situational. It doesn't depend on center court, TV cameras, or primetime slots. Whether she's playing under stadium lights or on a side court with one stubborn pigeon and a coffee vendor watching the match, that connection stays the same. That says a lot about who she is, and maybe even more about who she refuses to stop being. Now here's where things get interesting. Because Rome this May isn't just about tennis. It's about tension, real tension. The kind that doesn't show up in rankings tables, but absolutely shows up when the first ball gets struck. And to Alex's credit, she's never danced around it. She's said it herself, publicly, honestly, unprompted. She prefers hard courts, no excuses, no dramatic sighs, no conditions were tricky speech. She wasn't trying to soften expectations or set up a safety net. She was just being real, a refreshing concept in modern sports where half the interviews sound like they were approved by 3 managers and 1 sponsor. And if you look at her 2026 clay results heading into the Italian Open, well, the numbers haven't exactly rushed to argue with her. Her clay record sits at 2 wins and 3 losses. And those losses, not exactly to part-timers. They came against Leylah Fernandez, Elise Mertens, and Karolina Muchova, all world-class competitors, all players who know exactly how to make clay feel like quicksand if your movement is even half a step off. Now look at the first set scores in those matches. 1, 6, 2, 6, 0, 6. That last one? Yeah, you remember that one, and it gets tougher. On April 25th, Tennis 365 highlighted something after her Madrid defeat that should have made a lot more noise than it did. They pointed out that Alex had already lost 5 matches this season where she won 5 games, or fewer combined. Read that again, 5 matches, 5 or fewer total games in each. That's not just a rough patch. That's not one of those weeks. That's not your coach saying, shake it off, we go again. That's a pattern. And patterns in tennis? Patterns are dangerous. Because once opponents see them, they stop being accidents and start becoming targets. So let's be honest about the picture here. You've got a player who openly prefers another surface. You've got a clay record that backs up that preference. You've got a repeated trend of first set collapses against elite clay players. If you're looking at this logically, one question practically jumps off the page. Why is she here? Why skip a tournament in Spain where she had a favorable draw? Why give up a realistic shot at a title? Why arrive in Rome a full week early to throw yourself into one of the toughest clay environments in tennis? Because the easy path doesn't fix the pattern. And because something changed in April 2026, something huge, and somehow the mainstream tennis conversation barely gave it the oxygen it deserved. Tony Nadal is now working with Alex's team, not as a consultant, not as a ceremonial name for a press release, not as one of those strategic advisors nobody actually sees until photo day. He's active, present, involved, watching, correcting, teaching. And let's be clear about who we're talking about here. This is the man who stood in Rafael Nadal's corner for every single one of those 10 Roman titles. The man who helped build the movement, the spin, the footwork, the physical punishment, the baseline pressure, the entire clay court operating system that turned Rafa into the most feared clay player this sport has ever seen. And now, that same blueprint is being handed to a 20-year-old from Kazan City. That's not a coaching tweak. That's not a minor adjustment. That's like upgrading your software and suddenly discovering your laptop can bench press. And Alex knows exactly what it means. When she was asked about working with Tony, she said, "If you had told me this years ago, I would have completely lost my mind. I wouldn't have believed you." And honestly, fair reaction. She was 12 years old, watching Rafa dominate French open clay like he had cheat codes installed. Sitting in the stands, watching something that didn't feel athletic. It felt mythical. It felt untouchable. It felt like the kind of thing kids remember for life. And now, the architect of that mythology is in her box, watching her split step, correcting her positioning, tweaking her balance, passing down over 2 decades of clay court knowledge in real time. Then came Greg Rusetsky, former world number 4, US Open finalist. Not exactly a man who throws out compliments like free towels in the locker room. On his podcast Leading into Rome, he broke it down in a way that deserves a lot more attention than it got. His view was simple, but powerful. With Tony around, with Rafa's academy environment, with that much time spent learning how to survive and build points on clay, people are going to find it a lot harder to hit through Alex on this surface. Matches are going to get uglier, longer, more physical, more combative. And suddenly, the weaknesses clay specialists have been circling with red marker. And then Greg Rusetsky said something that made the tennis world stop mid-scroll, mid-opinion, mid-hot take. He said she's like Manny Pacquiao. And just like that, the conversation changed. Because when a former world number 4, a Grand Slam finalist, a man who has spent decades around elite athletes, reaches for the name Manny Pacquiao to explain what Alex Eala means to people, he is not talking about forehands rankings or clay court percentages. He's talking about impact. He's talking about identity. He's talking about what happens when one athlete becomes bigger than the sport they play. Pacquiao didn't just win fights. That's the easy version of the story. Pacquiao walked into arenas across the world and gave millions of Filipinos a reason to feel visible, especially in places where visibility was never guaranteed. He wasn't just throwing punches. He was carrying flags, stories, accents, families, neighborhoods, and generations of people who suddenly saw someone who looked like them standing under the brightest lights in the world. So when Rusetsky says Alex reminds him of Pacquiao, he's not making a tennis comparison. He's recognizing something deeper, something cultural, something emotional, something powerful enough that rankings suddenly start feeling like the least interesting part of the story. And nowhere does that hit harder than in Rome. Because Rome isn't just another tournament stop on the calendar. Rome, for Alex, might be becoming something much bigger than that. Here's the part that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Right now, there are roughly 38,000 permanent Filipino residents living in Rome. Not tourists, not fans who booked flights because the draw came out, not people chasing selfies outside the player's entrance. People who live there, people who work there, raise children there, pay bills there, build communities there, build identities there, build entire lives in a city whose national culture was never originally designed around them. That matters. And Alex felt it immediately. When she arrived in Rome last year, she admitted she didn't expect such a large Filipino presence. She said she ran into Filipinos 5 separate times just walking through the city before she had even played a match. Imagine that. You land in one of Europe's oldest cities, surrounded by history, architecture, scooters that somehow obey no known traffic laws. And before you've even unpacked your racket bag, your people are already finding you. And across Italy as a whole, over 156,000 documented Filipino residents now call the country home. And the Lazio region, Rome's home, holds more than a quarter of them. Now pause for a second and really picture this. You've spent years building a life in Rome. Maybe you moved for work, maybe for family, maybe for opportunity, maybe because life pushed you in directions nobody writes movie scripts about. You've learned the language. adapted to the culture, built something real, and then one afternoon, you hop on the metro, head toward the Foro Italico, grab your ticket, find your seat, and there on court 6 is a 20-year-old from the Philippines competing in a WTA 1000 draw, being broadcast to nearly 200 countries around the world, not as a wild card, not as a heartwarming underdog story, not as someone invited to participate, as someone who belongs there. That's not just a tennis achievement, that's a visibility event. That's an entire community seeing itself represented on one of the most glamorous stages in European sport, and doing it not through nostalgia, not through charity, not through sentiment, through merit, through ranking, through performance. And then the scoreboard flashes 6-0 in that opening set. Now suddenly everyone watching, those 38,000 Filipinos in Rome, plus millions more watching online, has a choice. Do you accept the usual sports script? Do you shrug, say tough draw, close the stream, and wait for next season? Or do you decide that the scoreboard doesn't get the final word? They chose the second option. The flags went up, the singing started, phones came out, videos spread, clips started bouncing across Filipino social media feeds within hours. Not because Alex had won, but because something more meaningful had happened. People had chosen to stay, and that matters more than people realize, because cheering when someone wins? Easy. Cheering when someone gets bageled on clay in front of thousands? That's investment. That's belief. That's loyalty with backbone. And history now says they were absolutely right. Because look what happened next. Alex Eala finishes 2025 ranked 50th in the world, a career high at the time. Then March 2026 arrives, and she climbs to number 29, the highest ranking any Filipino woman has ever reached in WTA history. Then things really start getting wild. She beats IGA Swiatek. Yes, that IGA. She reaches a WTA 1000 semifinal. She steps into Madrid, grabs the microphone after a match, and delivers a post-match interview in fluent Spanish. Calm, natural, completely at ease, like she'd been doing it her whole life. And the clip goes everywhere. Why? Because people weren't just watching a tennis player anymore. They were watching someone command a room in 3 languages, connect with 3 different audiences, and somehow make it all look effortless. That's when it becomes obvious. The fans who stayed on court 6 during that 6-0 set weren't being emotional. They weren't being unrealistic. They weren't being delusional. They were just early. They saw something the scoreboard hadn't figured out yet. And now, she's back in Rome, already on the Foro Italico practice courts, already putting in the extra hours, already choosing discomfort over convenience. She pulled out of a seated opportunity in Spain just to be here first. And now the stakes get even bigger. French Open is only 3 weeks away. 3 weeks. In tennis terms, that's basically tomorrow with extra laundry. Before anyone even starts thinking about Paris, though, there's one brutal checkpoint standing in the way: the Italian Open. And this field? Absolutely loaded. We're talking Arina Sabalenka, Coco Gauff, IGA Swiatek, Elena Rybakina. That's not a draw. That's a clay court survival exam with no multiple choice section. Nobody strolls casually through this tournament. You earn every hold, every breakpoint, every second serve that doesn't come back at your shoelaces. So if Alex Eala puts together a run here, let's say 3 wins, maybe a quarterfinal appearance against this level of opposition on clay, it doesn't just move her ranking, it changes her reputation. A run like that pushes her back toward the top 35. It puts her back in the neighborhood of her career high. But more importantly, it gives her something rankings alone can't provide: clay credibility. And in tennis, credibility on a surface can be almost as valuable as points. Rankings tell people where you are. Surface results tell them whether you actually belong there when conditions get ugly. If Alex makes noise in Rome, it sends a message to the entire tennis world. But maybe even more importantly, it sends a message to the people shaping the Paris draw. Because when the organizers at Roland Garros start looking at who's dangerous, who's peaking, who's quietly becoming a nightmare first-round matchup, Rome matters. And if the work that Tony Nadal has been doing with her starts showing up in live matches, not in practice clips, not in training photos, not in those mysterious feeling-good social posts athletes love to drop, but in actual wins, then suddenly people stop asking if the project is real. They start asking how far it can go. But before we start making predictions, there's something about Alex that deserves more attention, because it says everything about her mindset. She has never, not once, spoken about her clay struggles like they're some permanent limitation. Never. Not once has she framed clay as a ceiling. Every time she's talked about it, the language has been the same: time, work, belief. not wishful thinking, not hopefully one day, not we'll see what happens. Belief. She didn't say she hopes she can play well on clay. She didn't say she's trying to figure it out. She said she believes she can play as well on clay. That difference? Massive. Because athletes tell on themselves all the time. Sometimes it's not the stats, it's the wording. It's what slips through between the safe interview answers, and Alex's words never sounded like someone negotiating with doubt. They sounded like someone negotiating with time. And then came the vision board at the start of 2026. Yes, a vision board. Some players write goals in notebooks, some stick reminders on mirrors, some probably stare at rankings charts like it's stock market data. Alex? She put the clay swing right there in front of her, and right on it, French Open. That wasn't random, that wasn't decorative, that wasn't this would be nice, that was intentional. This was always part of the plan. And now, in May 2026, she turns 21. 21. Still incredibly young by tour standards, still learning, still evolving. And yet she skipped a tournament where she was seeded third, walked away from favorable points and a realistic title opportunity just to spend extra time on the clay courts of Rome. Think about that for a second. And here's what I think a lot of people still underestimate about the Foro Italico. For Alex, this isn't just another WTA 1000 stop. This is personal. This is the exact place where, as a 12-year-old girl, she watched Rafael Nadal do things on clay that didn't look human, sliding, defending, counterpunching, turning impossible rallies into routine points like he'd secretly memorized where every ball was going before it left the racket. She sat in those stands. She watched history happen. She watched a legend build something that looked almost mythical. And now, the man who coached the legend she watched as a kid is coaching her. Take a second and close that loop. The girl in the crowd watching Rafa dominate his clay cathedral becomes the woman on the court, with Rafa's coach sitting in her corner. Honestly, if you pitched that as a sports movie, somebody in the meeting would probably say, can we make it a little less perfect? Maybe add a subplot? But that's not fiction. That's what's happening right now on the red clay of the Foro Italico. So here's where things stand. The Italian Open draw drops on May 5th. The second Alex's first round opponent is announced, everything changes. Because over the next 2 weeks in Rome, every match she plays becomes a live experiment. Every hold of serve, every long rally, every first set, every pressure point, every tiebreak, every adjustment. All of it feeds into the biggest question of her 2026 season. Has Tony Nadal's clay education truly taken root? Can Alex Eala turn practice court progress into real match wins against players who grew up living and breathing clay tennis? 3 wins. That's the number. Not one, not a respectable showing, not some encouraging signs. 3 wins. 3 wins at a WTA 1000 on clay, against this field, against this level of opposition, against players who treat red clay like it's part of their family inheritance. That changes everything for Alex Eala heading into the French Open. Not just the rankings, not just the seeding, not just the headlines. The conversation, and for the 38,000 Filipinos living in Rome, who won't need boarding passes, airport lines, or overpriced coffee at Gate 14 just to watch history unfold. And for the more than 156,000 across Italy who've been waiting for a moment exactly like this. The stakes were never really about ranking points anyway. No, this has always been about something bigger. It's about what it feels like when someone walks into rooms your community was never expected to own, and somehow makes it feel like you belong there too. Court 6, May 7th, 2025. Scoreboard reads 6-0, and the flag still went up. The singing still started. The belief never left. That wasn't denial. That wasn't blind loyalty. That was a community recognizing a story before the scoreboard caught up. And now, the next chapter begins this week. So if you want front row analysis, match breakdowns, tactical reads, and every big moment as it unfolds, make sure you're here, subscribed, and locked in. Because if you miss what happens next, you won't be hearing about it live. You'll be reading about it the morning after.